entitled Ending the Holy War on Science and Culture. And it's subtitled, When Christians Act Childish, Everybody Loses. So the question for the hour will be, what will it take to get Christians to stop acting childish? And how fitting is it that you chose a Christian to deal with the Christian problem? A second subtitle for this talk could be, How to Make a Good Impression on the Christians You Ridicule. I came from a background where I was in acute need of ridicule. I was specially trained for scientific ignorance and obnoxious militant activism against atheists and evolutionists. And even those evangelicals were too liberal and spineless for us fundamentalists. We call them evangelifish. Because as I like to make clear during this talk, there are all kinds of people who claim the name Christian. And one of the moral decisions every freethinker has to make is whether it's right to deal with each kind just the same. British canon William Vanstone said that the church is like a public swimming pool where most of the noise comes from the shallow end. So hence my outline for this talk. First, my years at the shallow end, how science opened my eyes, then we'll go into how atheists opened my eyes yet farther, how to ethically ridicule a Christian, that's our subject for our conference, how to distinguish the harmful from the enlistable, the recruitable, and how to solve the atheist public relations problem. Did you know you had one of those? And last, even Christians should know it, people don't need religion to have morality. I'm the first Christian to say so today, so I get the privilege of saying that. I'm not sure if the other guys are going to say that or not. What my atheist friends have done for me during the past 4 years is something I hope each of you would be able to do for perhaps many others, other conservative Christians in your life, and that is to hold up a non-religious mirror to our faces to show us what we look like to non-religious people. I learned that every day, evangelical leaders and apologists, you know who this guy is. They reinforce the Christian reputation for ignorance, arrogance, condescension, dishonesty, cult-like manipulation, intolerance, and judgmentalism. And the mission in my own little nonprofit organization, Daystar Research, has been evolving, and I've been working on a book for years called Evolution Story, How We Know What We Know About Paleo. And that new website will go live next week, evolutionstory.com. But my organization has been evolving to a place where some of our chief purposes now are fighting irrational extremism with rationality, raising both the scientific and the theological standards used by Christians, and encouraging Christians to reverse their reputation for anti-intellectualism, insensitivity, and judgmentalism. And perhaps if we have time, I can also launch into a diatribe on what atheists look like to Christians and how much of their impressions might be deserved. Which parts of the new atheist rhetoric will change evangelical hearts? And which parts will give Christians the moral high ground? And what will it take to end the evangelical holy war on science and culture? I now have all the answers because my atheist friends have given them to me. So let me tell you what I've learned. I actually had the scientific answers before I was abducted by atheists 4 years ago. It was a gentle abduction. I think I'm still suffering from the Stockholm Syndrome, though. And so the other book I'm writing is titled Abducted by Atheists, and it's subtitled How Godless Heathen Infected My Evangelical Brain, Purged it of Platitudes, Taught Me the Truth About Dinosaurs and Hominids, and reignited my quest for true love. Something for everybody in that title. But before I was abducted by a godless heathen, I'd already gone from young earth creationist in my college days to understanding, eventually, I had an understanding of the Big Bang Theory, and finally, the evolution of all life, including human life. That was a big step for me some years ago. And after being taught the opposite all those years before, I was just paranoid enough that I had to see all this for myself along the way. And I started calling scientists after I read everything I get my hands on in terms of the scientific material to get my many questions answered, and then traveling around the world wherever new discoveries were being made to see the evidence coming out of the ground for myself. And along the way, I started publishing science news stories in newspapers and science magazines. So to tell you first how science opened my eyes, let me show you just a bit of what nature showed me in my most recent years as a science journalist. And because I've been starving for fellowship with people who I can share this science stuff with, since I spent so many years among conservative Christians who just didn't want to hear any of this, after I got cosmology out of my system and finished visiting Nobel Prize-winning astrophysicists and NASA team leaders and theoretical physicists like Stephen Hawking and George Smoot and Alan Guth, father of inflationary theory, and he won the Nobel Prize in 2006 for his discovery of the ripples in the microwave background radiation. Got to interview all these guys and got to learn a lot about cosmology and go into some depth. And after I did all that, I ended up writing a book about that, about their work. And that ended up in 5 language versions. And I also published a magazine for a few years and did a bit of speaking in various venues because I thought I knew so much. But I realized I still didn't know much about how life evolved on this planet. So then, to get all my questions answered about evolution, I started with the origin of the phyla. And I spent time with paleontologist Jianyuan Chen at the top there. And I started learning about that while I was bouncing along dried riverbeds across southern China in places like Yungan and Zhejiang, where we split open rocks containing Precambrian and early Cambrian fossils, learning about the origin of the chordates, my favorite phylum, and writing about the first one, Hycawala lanceolata. That's it on the left bottom corner there, for the Boston Globe. And more recently, I traveled through Argentina and Brazil, participating in the excavation of the world's largest animals ever to walk this planet. I took that one live. The sauropods. Now, the other thing that must be from the Creation Museum. You know, they have dinosaurs and humans together riding each other. I think they show Raquel Welch in 1 million BC over and over again at the Creation Museum. But I learned about sauropod evolution, and I spent time eventually with 20 sauropod paleontologists around the world, particularly Jorge Calvo and Rodolfo Correa, who described the world's largest dinosaur, Argentinosaurus. There it is right there. And the largest carnivore, Giganotosaurus. And writing about the steps in sauropod evolution from small, bipedal, omnivorous prosauropods. By the way, Dino was a prosauropod, if you ever wondered. And we know that these earliest ones were omnivorous from their teeth. Look how small they were starting out. And then we see the transitions to the giant quadrupedal herbivorous sauropods. And I wrote about that in the journal Nature. And a lot of the paleontological evidence for continental drift comes from these guys finding dinosaurs in South America and farther down, all the way down into the South Pole, Antarctica. And they matched the fossils, the dinosaurs they were finding in Africa. And as predicted, they recently even found prosauropod dinosaur fossils in Antarctica, and the same kind of dinosaurs now across the ocean from that time when Antarctica was attached to India and Australia and South America. So I could remind me later, if anybody sees me between sessions, I can tell you a neat story about how that helicopter was trying to carry a 1-ton slab and couldn't make it, and it was dropping after they pushed the slab off the cliff 200 feet, 300 feet, 400 feet, and finally the New Zealand pilot got enough airlift that he was able to go on ahead. He had his finger on the release button the whole time. So that's some interesting work. But here's a short animation that shows us how the Earth's land masses shifted during the Mesozoic, the age of the dinosaurs. I just have to show you this because it's kind of cool. This is the supercontinent Pangaea, splitting into Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. I jumped the gun, let me go back to that. And notice how India and Australia are going to their places away from Antarctica, where it was attached before. Notice how it's splitting north to south, and also between South America and Africa, splitting east and west. And, but we know the times when those were attached, partly because of the paleontological evidence of the dinosaurs that are the same across continents during those periods. I also spent time with Jose Bonaparte, the father of Argentine paleontology, in Buenos Aires to learn about the origin of mammals, such as his discovery of the family Brasiliodontidae. And I spent time with Richard Leakey in Nairobi, and then sifting through hominid fossil sites with Meave Leakey and Louise Leakey in Kubifora, Kenya, while they were discovering the fact that 2 million years ago, 3 Homo species lived contemporaneously with Homo erectus. And I wrote about that for Scientific American. Picture me trying to sit on a supper table describing this to my Christian friends. And then to learn about the earliest anatomically modern humans in Europe, I joined Eric Trinkos's cave diving team in Romania's Carpathian Mountains, where in order to reach what is perhaps the world's most inaccessible fossil site, we entered an hour-long triathlon of swimming, cave diving through narrow passages, and I just learned to scuba dive 2 weeks before this, and I was afraid I was in 12 feet of water in a swimming pool, and I was coming up for air because I was so frightened under the 12 feet of water. But I learned how to scuba dive well enough to cave dive finally by 2 weeks' time. But I remember all the mothers with their little children around the pool laughing at me when I came up. So there's this triathlon of the swimming and the cave diving, and then it's an hour-long triathlon going up to then climbing the chimney to near the top of the mountain to reach the gallery called Peshtura Cu Oase, where they were excavating the 2 earliest modern humans in Europe, dated to 40,000 years ago. And nobody had been in there for 40,000 years in that cave. And I wrote about that for the Washington Post and The New Scientist. I tell you about the evidence I've seen for evolution, including human evolution, in hopes that this might engender a different kind of interest from the kind of interest I got from my fellow leaders at my conservative church, because their reaction was to kick me off their elder board. And then another leadership team, when they saw what I wrote in Nature, that was actually an earlier thing I did in Nature before that, because I refused to sign a statement about my belief in the existence of an historical individual named Adam, not Brown. And I hope to get a different reaction here from what I got from my closest Christian friends and relatives and wife, because their reaction was to kick me out of their lives. That's not quite fair. I actually lost my friends in 2 steps, half of them because of the evolution thing, and then the other half over the wife issue, since I moved out after she stopped talking to me for the last 3 years I was there. But I was in big trouble with all my Christian friends, ironically, because there was no adultery, meaning it wasn't a biblical divorce. And I've since offered to commit adultery, thinking that would be helpful, but the people who are most serious about this are not known for their sense of humor, and that didn't help at all. Now, let me tell you about how atheists opened my eyes. It was just after I was kicked off the elder board from that church and left it that I sought out and met an atheist who I'd noticed doing a column in the Kansas City Star by the name of Cole Morgan, and then he was in the faith section. I thought it was interesting I was always reading the faith section, having an atheist there. And then I met someone who I can only describe as a raving, tyrannical Bolshevik atheist with a sense of humor named Iggy, whose mission in life is to put Christians on the spot with all kinds of KGB interrogation, during which he finds out what kind of underwear you're wearing, and it turns out it serves as a kind of test among Kansas City atheists for religious types. If you can get along with Iggy, you pass the Iggy test and you can't be too bad. And so soon all the Kansas City area freethinkers welcomed me into their groups. And of course, they wanted to convert me into atheism, but I'd already gone through my biggest crisis of faith many years before when I examined various religions, including no religion, over a 7-year period, which is what motivated my obsession with science. I still consider every day to be its own crisis of faith for me. But anyway, then my new atheist friends invaded a little discussion group that I had going at the time called the Provocateurs, composed of Christians who weren't going to church anywhere, and somehow my new atheist friends drove off all my semi-Christian friends who loved, because they love science as much as I did, and I was having more fun than I'd ever had at a Bible study with these atheists. The group's now called Provocateurs and Peacemakers, and the purpose of Provocateurs and Peacemakers, our raison d'etre, is to, number 1, provoke, being called provocateurs, to provoke deeper thinking and dialogue between people with differing viewpoints. Number 2, to create friendships that can weather our disagreements. And number 3, to model peace before a polarized world. Provocateurs and Peacemakers meets every second and fourth Fridays of the month. The second Friday for our topic night, where we have special speakers on every kind of topic imaginable. Next time we have an illusionist coming into town from Arizona who will perform and then talk about the tricks behind the mind reading and seances. And every fourth Friday we get together for what's called our Lazy Readers Night, which is kind of like a book club, except instead of everybody having to bring the same book and be reading the same book, we just discuss whatever you've been reading. And it's whether it's a book or a blog or a magazine article, and then we take about 3 minutes for them to share and then 3 minutes for us to discuss, and sometimes we'll go through a dozen or even 20 books a night. And we always learn a ton about what's going on in science, and literature, and psychology, and philosophy, and religion, and the movies, and current events, and history. And we're meeting for that next Friday in Lenexa, and we always go out to a nearby watering hole afterwards, the Blue Moose being our favorite lately, to continue our conversations. And there's our website to, or will be in a second, to check out. Was it in the last slide? Oh, it'll be coming up, I think. Our website, if you want to check out what's going on at our future meetups. What I found interesting was that when my atheist friends came into the group soon after all the Christians left, I don't think the atheists had bad breath. Part of it was just that Iggy was there, of course. But I soon learned that, what you all know so well, that a number of studies reveal that atheists are the most disliked minority in America. Least likely to get elected to office. The last ones you want your son or daughter to marry, or even for them to invite over to dinner and say, guess who's coming to dinner? The farthest out group from my conservative Christian in-group. In short, an oppressed minority. In fact, we sort of reran this experiment when I had 25 Christians sign up to come and 25 atheists to our Provocateurs and Peacemakers, actually just as we started out to rename it with the extra peacemakers at the end, to see how that dialogue would go. And after the 4 sessions they signed up for, almost all the Christians never came back. We do actually have a couple or 3 who continue to come these days, so now we see what it's like to be in the minority. But in terms of the impression atheists are making on me, I have to say that one of the best arguments for atheism is the way my atheist friends over the past 4 years have been much more congenial and helpful and understanding than my Christian friends, much more accepting of me in spite of my differences with them. Even Iggy turned out to be all right, and mostly bluff, and he actually has a heart of gold when it comes to recognizing a friend in need. He just keeps calling me his delusional, batshit crazy evangelical brother. So some of you know him. So I can't begin to tell you all the ways my atheist friends have turned out to provide a study in contrast to my Christian friends. Well, I can begin to. They offered me, helped me move my stuff into my apartment. 2 women gave me cooking lessons. 1 girl offered me French kissing lessons on the assumption that most evangelicals are clueless and deprived in this regard, which is true. Clearly, I never got this kind of care and concern from my Christian friends, because you can't experience that from them if you don't toe the line on their particular in-group expectations. So I'm trying to apply this experience to using my little organization to help Christians learn how to join the larger culture rather than going so far off into their own little corners, and to do my part towards trying to stop even the evangelical holy war on science and culture. And when it comes to on science, they would call this mainstream science, what they have a problem with. They distinguish between the two. Much of the trouble Christians are making could be avoided if they began to see the value of science for its own sake, and not just when it serves the cause of Christian apologetics, which for many of my evangelical friends and fundamentalists, that is the purpose of science. So part of the education Christians need is to learn to see science first and foremost as valuable in its own right, for its own sake. And second, to see it as valuable for helping to solve many human problems. And third, to see science as not just an apologetic, but when it comes to our faith, as informative to our beliefs about the Bible, meaning we may need to adjust some of our misconceptions, such as my old conception that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 24-hour days, as I was taught, which never actually came from the Bible to begin with, but was only part of my particular Christian tradition. Or that Adam must be taken as a literal historical individual, even though the word Adam in Hebrew actually just means humankind. And the use of all those sevens in early Genesis, and the tree of life, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, none of this sounds like it was ever meant to be taken very literally, particularly because this section shares precisely the same symbolic language and the numerology used in other books that everyone recognizes as allegory, like Revelation and like Ezekiel. So that's the kind of thing I meant by saying that Christians need to have not only their scientific standards raised, but their theological standards. As Eugenie Scott is fond of saying, intelligent design is bad science and bad theology. I'll talk about that another time if I get a chance. I mean, Christians today are even worse than the way Jesus' disciples are presented as absolute boneheads in the Gospels, where they were always taking Jesus way too literally. Jesus says, beware of the leaven of the scribes and Pharisees. And the disciples say, leaven? Oh, the master's upset because we forgot to bring bread while we were going out the door this morning. I mean, it's kind of like a Monty Python routine. And I can just see Jesus, you know, he's maybe rubbing his head, doing a slow burn, and so Jesus has to keep chiding them, and it actually says something like this. It says, why would you take that as we need to take bread? Do you even remember what I did with those 5 loaves, feeding the 5,000 the other day? You can look this up for yourself in Matthew 16, but I think I've got that almost word for word. If evangelicals today were interpreting the Gospels the way they interpret Genesis, when Jesus says, I am the door, they'd be claiming Jesus is made out of wood. Now, if Jesus is allowed to chide his disciples in the spirit of holy correction, shouldn't atheists be able to chide Christians who do this kind of stuff? Which brings us to our next point, how to ethically ridicule a Christian. There are 2 ways you can make fun of Christians to their face. One way, you will succeed in getting them really angry and get them working harder against all free-thinking causes, and you'll reinforce their desire to fight the good fight against the mean and immoral atheists. The other way, you'll cause them to actually think about what they will have to agree is morally wrong about their actions. And you should know that where I'm heading with this is based on what I just talked about. You can use your knowledge of Jesus as he's presented in the New Testament to do 2 things. Number 1, you can encourage the ones you want to enlist to your causes. And number 2, you can use this knowledge to shake up the ones who are way too out of touch to support your causes yet. But ultimately, it's the causes that are most important, right? So don't be afraid of giving ground by occasionally saying something nice about Jesus, because when they're doing something pretty much the opposite of what their founder said or did, by saying something positive about what their founders said or did, you're simultaneously slamming them. You're insulting them, but you mean it in a good way. This is a supremely ethical insult. You can tell them an evangelical told you this was doing them a favor. You can do this on separation of church and state issues. When a Christian is arguing for prayer in the schools or God and the dollar bills, you can say, oh, wait, didn't Jesus take the side of separation in church and state when he said, render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render to God that which is God's? You can do this whenever Christians are on the hawkish side of attacking this or that country, or whenever they take particularly a hostile attitude toward you. Didn't Jesus say, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the merciful, love your enemies? If they condemn you or someone else for their lifestyle, didn't Jesus say, judge not that you be not judged? If they're unfriendly, didn't Jesus say, if you love only those who love you, what reward will you expect for that? If you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than anyone else? Remember, when you have a noble ethical goal to get Christians to stop acting so childish, that's our goal here, and to make the world a more pleasant place. If you want original ammunition for this stuff, just look at Matthew 5, 6, and 7, which is dripping with anti-conservative, anti-conformist, anti-isolationist teachings. If they isolate and insulate themselves from the rest of the world, never venturing out of their safe evangelical communities, and they're too holier than thou to go out and party with you, you can point out, wasn't Jesus known to party with traitorous tax collectors and all kinds of sinners? Wasn't he called a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of sinners? Wasn't he accused of spending too much time hanging around with the wrong kind, Samaritans, lepers, prostitutes? It's all there in Mark 2. If they accuse you of using language that's too strong or being too disrespectful of their religious leaders, didn't Jesus save his most scathing zingers for the religious leaders of his day? Every time you turn around, he's castigating the scribes and the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. One atheist friend of mine goes around giving talks on the nasty sayings of Jesus. What he doesn't point out is that almost all of those nasty things Jesus says are directed against the religious leaders. I really think that if Jesus was walking around America today, he'd be on your side against the religious leaders and all the judgmental and callous remarks they're making in his name. Jesus would be on your side. This is why I had this t-shirt made. If you know Christians who are intolerant of people holding different views from them, you can ask them, didn't Jesus tell the story of the Good Samaritan who belonged to a group that was called despised by the Jews, to show that being a good neighbor means befriending people who are not from your religious subculture, people your in-group might consider to be of the wrong race or of the wrong religion? Or to get out your big guns, you can just go cut right to the gospel, and you can ask, did Jesus die on the cross asking God to forgive his tormentors for this? On any of these things, you can take the moral high ground just by saying, where do you get your morality? From your founder? Then why are you doing the opposite of what your founder taught? I'm sure many of you have heard Bill Maher use this kind of criticism to Christians to great effect. He was talking on his show once about how evangelicals support war and torture to get information more than any other religious group. And he said, quote, for over 2,000 years, Christians have been lawyering the Bible to find out how love thy neighbor can mean hate thy neighbor. Martin Luther King gets to call himself a Christian because he actually practiced loving his enemies. And Gandhi was so fucking Christian, he was Hindu. But if you rejoice in revenge, torture, and war, you cannot say you're a follower of the guy who said, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. And near the end of his monologue, he says, Jesus lays on the hippie stuff pretty thick. He has lines like, do not repay evil with evil and do not take vengeance on someone who wrongs you. Really, it's in that book you hold up when you scream at the gay people. Then he closes with, I know I've been hard on you guys, but I can say all this because I'm a non-Christian, just like most Christians. And that brings us to our next point, how to distinguish the harmful from the enlistable, those who might be recruited, if not to atheism or agnosticism, at least to the causes you care most about, assuming you do care most about the here and now, and whether they can be allies in the causes you find most important in this life. Primatologist Frans de Waal writes, if some religions are worse than others, then some must be better. I'd love to hear the atheist perspective on what makes for a good religion, or the reason why different religions support different moralities. And I'd agree that would be an interesting, worthwhile conversation I'd like to have with an atheist. Atheist author Francis Spufford says, maybe we are entering a phase of greater tolerance in which, having abandoned the impossible task of trying to abolish religion, atheists might be able to apply themselves to the rather more useful task of distinguishing between kinds whose adherents hope you'll be damned and kinds whose adherents hope if you aren't. The point is that our thinking may be too narrow if we can only distinguish between religious people in terms of the amount of their devotion to their religious group. It may be how they apply what I believe to be their God-given conscience, or what all of us would agree to be a generally good set of ethical values that all societies have evolved, how they apply that to their particular religion that matters. If you had to be stuck on a desert island with a hateful atheist or a big-hearted Christian, who would you pick? Turn that question around on me, and I'd pick the big-hearted atheist every time. So who is the enemy and who is the friend? Depends on your goals. What are your goals? Depends on us. And here's where everyone, atheist, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, Pastafarian, this is where everyone starts on a level playing field. Because, as I'm guessing, J.T. Eberhardt and Matt Dillahunty and most of our esteemed non-religious speakers will be telling us throughout the day, morality is not something that you need any particular religion to have. People abnormal, self-gratifying decadence. This is not only nonsense, but intellectually lazy. So how can a real Jesus follower not support atheists who are doing what you're doing lately? And what you're doing lately, of course, is taking action on behalf of the poor by bringing non-perishable items and hygiene products, and so on. Jesus made this very point to his followers when he told them of a future when God is pictured as a king who will separate people, not according to which belief or non-belief system they belong to, but according to very different criteria. He tells the one group, I was hungry and you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. So people ask, when did we see you hungry or thirsty? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as much as you did to one of the least of these, you did it to me. Certainly the world's problems of war, crime, poverty, hunger, disease are not going to be solved by atheists alone, or by Christians alone. Or at least we know that they will be solved sooner when these groups work together. In fact, I claim that one of the best ways to apply rationality to morality is to recognize the need to work together to solve humanity's greatest problems, to reduce human suffering. I've seen various forms of the Atheist Ethical Guidebook. The Third Humanist Manifesto tells us life's fulfillment emerges from individual participation in the service of humane ideals, and that our goal should be respect for differing yet humane views in an open, secular, democratic, environmentally sustainable society. Or we have Penn Jillette's list of 10 commandments, which include respect to protect all human life. Many believe that thou shalt kill only refers to people of the same tribe. I say it's all human life, he says. Don't steal. That includes magic tricks and jokes. Don't lie. Don't waste so much time being envious. So my observation is that all societies and religions have ethical rules. Dewar says, long before any of the current religions, Neanderthals and early humans took care of the handicapped. This is also true for our primate kin. I agree when he says, instead of making us do things we normally wouldn't, religion may render its chief contribution by endorsing and promoting certain natural tendencies, a much more modest contribution. I agree that having ethical rules is part of the package of our physical and societal evolution. But let me close with something more provocative that I, as a Christian, take from this fact, that I've got the way to accommodate in most of this talk. You might be interested in why I'm still a Christian today, and how I, as a Christian, think about where God comes in if, as I believe, he used normal evolutionary processes to make us plenty aware of the sensible rules we need to get along together, to thrive, both as individuals and as society. So that in the 1st century CE, when Jesus came along, the need was not for more but better rules, particularly. The Jews already had 613 laws to keep. They didn't need more of those. My claim is that what they needed, and what we need today, is the motivation to keep those ethical rules. Our conscience tells us the right things to do. And I believe science and technology give us the tools to do the things we need to do to solve the problems facing humanity as never before. Our problems, human suffering, stem from war, crime, poverty, illiteracy, disease. These should be the greatest moral concerns of our time. And science has given us the tools to solve each of these. Right now, we have the tools to solve the major causes of human suffering through better food distribution, through vaccinations, through malaria, through vaccinations, and through waterborne, through wiping out malaria and waterborne diseases in sub-Saharan Africa, and perhaps to obliterate AIDS on that continent, and bring food to the starving in third world countries the world over. We have the technological ability to do all this right now. But compared with the need, we've hardly made a dent. Why is that? Is it lack of technology? No, it's a lack of resources, lack of money. No, if everyone in first world countries gave a mere $10 a month and got organized enough to make this a priority, we could cure 90% of the diseases people are dying in third world countries. And we could feed, clothe, and bring clean water to 100% of the world's population. We have that ability right now. Why are we doing it? This is the great moral question we should all be asking. Anyone who studies the question for very long knows the answer. We aren't solving the problem because we lack the resolve, the will. We're more motivated to think about solving, I'm more motivated to think about solving my own tiny problems than I am to think about putting forth the needed effort to solve the life-threatening problems of the needy. So we've had no shortage of good rules for the past many thousands of years, but good rules aren't solving the problems. Having science and technology is necessary, but apparently not sufficient to solve the problems. What it takes to solve the problems is us being motivated, us caring enough about what others far beyond our kin and our in-groups are doing out there. It takes us having a heart. So when I look for a religion, for that matter, for any system of human problem solving, I look for something that challenges our hearts. And this is one of the reasons I'm drawn to Jesus. It was all about the heart. He says, your rule says don't kill, but I tell you, don't even hold anger in your heart. Your rule is don't eat anything unclean. But I tell you, it's not what goes into the mouth that makes you unclean, it's what comes out from the heart. That's where the problem stems. When Einstein wrote a piece in the New York Times about the then new problem of nuclear proliferation, he said, quote, science has brought forth this danger, but the real problem is in the hearts and minds of men. We will not change the hearts of other men by mechanisms, but by changing our hearts. Richard Dawkins wrote in an article that was published in Free Inquiry, which he titled Atheists for Jesus, where he identified the same problem. He wrote, the theory of natural selection itself seems calculated to foster selfishness at the expense of public good, violence, callous indifference to suffering, short-term greed at the expense of long-term foresight. If any goes on to talk about a few exceptional people who says are, quote, kind, generous, helpful, compassionate, nice, the sort of super niceness I'm talking about in humans goes too far. It is a misfiring, even a perversion of the Darwinian take on niceness. But if it is a perversion, it is the kind of perversion we need to encourage and spread. And he asks, how can we do it? How shall we take the minority of super nice humans whom we all know and increase their number, perhaps until even they become a majority of the population? He mentions cases where religion spread like an epidemic, but of course he doesn't want the supernatural element. Maybe we just need to find the right person to be worthy of our, quote, strong tendency to learn from and copy admired role models, unquote. So he considers Gandhi, Mother Teresa, we can't stand, and settles on Jesus. He says, the best I can offer is what I hope may be a catchy slogan, Atheists for Jesus, with grace of a t-shirt. Perhaps the oxymoronic impact of Atheists for Jesus might be just what is needed to kickstart the meme of super niceness. And Dawkins closes by speculating whether a humble Jesus would actually wear such a shirt, or if, quote, modesty would compel him to turn his t-shirt around to read Jesus for Atheists. I think Dawkins is onto something. And I wonder if we need not only more than good rules and more than a good role model. And here's where, for me, the gospel of Jesus is motivating. I'm not saying that others can't find other things motivating. I would encourage people to get motivated in whatever way it results in action. I actually have rational, even scientific reasons for thinking that Jesus, when understood as presented in the Bible and not on top radio, is motivating. Two psychologists, David Destino and Heeren Vallisolo, did a long series of experiments to find out what causes people to treat each other nicely or not so nicely. We've always known about kin altruism, we do nice things for our relatives, and reciprocal altruism, we do this for me and I can't, I'll do that for you. These have selective advantages, but they found out there's only one motivating factor that causes people to make sacrificial actions on behalf of others, even when they or their kin couldn't possibly pay you back. And that motivating factor was gratitude. It didn't have to be gratitude toward the person who now needed help. Just being in a grateful state of mind causes people to choose to sacrificially lend a hand to others when they wouldn't have otherwise. Apparently we're wired in such a way that when we feel grateful for what someone has done for us, sacrificially for us, it becomes easier for us to make sacrifices of our own time and desires and interests in the interest of others. My point, for me, the message of the cross, when internalized as intended, seems to me to be the ideal message for motivating gratitude in us, causing people to act sacrificially on behalf of others, even when they can't pay you back and they aren't related to you. And for me, the natural response to understanding that I can't earn my way to God, but that He is taking action to bring Himself to me, my reaction naturally would be love back to Him and gratitude. This is also the message that best fits Richard Dawkins' quote, grander and more incomprehensible kind of God that he says is the only kind he would consider. The idea of a God too great for us to reach doesn't negate the idea of a God who's great enough to reach us. Hey, you ask an evangelical to speak, you'd never be sure I was really an evangelical if I didn't devote at least 3% of my time to evangelism. we have evolved as a mostly religious species, mostly, still the minority, or at least with a need to see purpose in our lives, purpose behind it all. And priests throughout the ages have been only too happy to make up all kinds of stories and try to fill those needs. But of all the religions, all the systems of duties and rules, sacrifices try to reach up to the infinite. One claim of Revelation stands out to me for turning around that whole idea and saying it's not what we finite ones do to try to somehow reach the infinite, which is likely impossible as it sounds. It's what the infinite has done to reach us. That's not unreasonable. For the ancients, what the gospel of the cross meant was that the ancient sacrificial systems of the world were turned upside down, so it's not about our sacrifice to God, it's for us. For us today, it tells us that the grand, incomprehensible one who set this universe on a trajectory from hydrogen to humans is reasonably enough more than just a little interested in the results. And perhaps the most interesting things in this corner of the galaxy, which is each human heart. In fact, it's a demonstration of love in the most personal and dramatic way possible, appealing to a fact we all recognize. There is no greater love than this, that one would lay down one's life for one's friends. Without this, the Supreme Being is beyond our comprehension, beyond relating to us. But with it, I believe we can have the gratitude that can motivate us to love our neighbor, not just in word, but in action. All right, I guess we might have a question or two if we have any time left. Yes, that there, the light blue shirt, or?
Okay, so you say that Christianity is the best motivating force behind this. Apart from the nickel-nickel question of whether it's, true, Christianity's had 2,000 years to prove itself, and it hasn't done a very good job. Why do you think that this is where we should, the vast majority of our exit?
I think it's a matter of fairness. I think if God simply chose, or some of these Calvinists believe, those we see around us who happen to be born into a Christian family, those would be the people who get to go to heaven, that to me would be ultimate injustice.
That's not answering.
No, the reason I answer the question is, if everybody was to only go to heaven or be with God or have a relationship with Him or have fulfillment with Him based on what they were born into, that would not be just. The reality is, people, I think God judges us on a different basis. And so therefore, we can't judge people based on what home they got born into because they happen to have the nomenclature of Christian attached to them.
You still didn't answer the question, but ask somebody else.
Okay, yes, sir.
You talked up the value of science, the immeasurable value of science. How do you square that with the belief that someone rose from the dead and walked on water?
I believe that the one who created, I believe that this whole universe speaks to amazing order, patterns we see in the laws of the universe.
I throw in one additional request. Instead of just explaining what you believe, can you also explain why you believe it?
Okay, this is why I believe it. Because we have these patterns, these laws that are set in the universe, which can only be recognizable, so that any miracle would ever happen, but could only be recognizable if we have these normal patterns and laws that are normally going on. I'm not one of these people who believes that God's doing miracles and changing laws and things all over the place all the time. We wouldn't be able to recognize a miracle if that were the case. But God is great enough to create all this, set up the laws, and be great enough to be able to overrun this once in a while. And let me go over this side and I'll come back to you over here.
Hi, I just got a comment. I was told by the Red Cross Thursday, and if you are able or willing to donate blood, they would surely appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll take note of that. Yes, in green.
You mentioned being in South Africa with the leagues looking at the
It's actually Kenya, not South Africa.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Thank you. I've heard that there's this sort of the first family in founded biology. Can you tell us a tiny bit more about that experience?
Yeah, the Leakey family starts with Louis Leakey, who actually, his parents came to Kenya from England as missionaries there. They were much more liberal type people, not the type of people where I grew up with. The original Leakey, Louis Leakey's father, was not a believer in historical Adam, but he was a believer in Jesus and so on. Well, pretty much the way I believe today. Richard came along, and when he was brought up in a boarding school, his first experience with Christians was, it was a Christian boarding school, was they stuffed him in this cage and they threw dust on him and then peed on him. And Richard has not been very, this hasn't made him tough actually, he doesn't hold any hard feelings or anything, but he says this simply was the beginning of his introduction to religion and to Jesus and so on. So I can understand why, he was definitely not a believer. Anyway, so that's Richard Leakey. He married Neve Leakey, and so I met, Richard has lost both legs below the knee when he was in a plane crash that apparently was a result of sabotage, when he was involved in a lot of politics there. He was also persecuted himself back when he was in that school and later on in politics for standing up for the rights of black people, which at that time, especially in his childhood, not many people were standing up for the rights at all. So anyway, this is a family that I admire. Richard, Neve are the couple that gave birth to Louise, and so Louise and Neve form a mother-daughter team, and they're the ones who are doing some of the cutting-edge work these days from what they can find out there in Kubi Fort. There are other teams that work other sides of the lake. There's the Chicana Basin, Lake Chicana, on the west side and the east side. You can find dinosaurs on the one side, they're way older. Then you come to the 4 million to 2 million year strata that are on the west side, east side of the lake where they are used most of the time. And that's where they're finding most of the hominids. And they know exactly, because of the great geological work that was done by a woman whose name I can't recall off the top of my head, worked on this for 40 years to get the geological facts just right as far as dating and everything. So now all I have to do is know where they're standing, and they know whatever's eroding out of the ground at that place, they can know the age. And of course, they do other tests after they find fossils to be more sure as well. Anyway, it gives you some knowledge of what's going on with babies these days. Yes?
Okay, I kind of want to around an earlier question and then ask it since I don't feel like you really got to it.
Sure.
So, let me ask you, let's suppose atheism has been dominant, what has been dominating the world for 2,000 years, and we ended up where we are now. Would you consider...
Okay, ending up where we are now, meaning, what do you describe?
The wars, the poverty, that we're going to have to solve. Would you be willing to say at that point you would not consider atheism a success?
If everything was as it is today, and there were war, poverty, and so on, atheists were in charge for the last 2,000 years. The question is, would I consider...
Would you be willing to say atheism is not a success?
Atheism was not a success. I think I had pretty much the same view I do today. That my view of human nature is that whoever's in charge, we have the same human nature. So I guess that we have certain problems that need to be addressed because of what's going on in our hearts. I believe we're made in the image of God, I'll put it that way. So I believe there's something very good about each of us. There's also things we wrestle with that are problematic, and that's going to be true whether you have Christians or atheists in charge, or Muslims or Hindus or anybody, or Pastafarians. So I have a lot of belief in Pastafarians. That's the whole thing. Yeah. Yes?
Why do fundamental Christian, evangelical Christians continue to evangelicalize while they group the Jesus and the Christian Jesus, but they agree also with like the origins of evolution. So why do they keep continuing testing that?
I think each of us finds something, or we're looking for something we haven't found it, that we think does motivate us to be a more ethical, more nice person. For me, somebody who believes in evolution and believes in Jesus, I found something that helps me, helps motivate me to care about people that maybe I wouldn't care quite so much about otherwise. And for me, that's my reason. Yes? Eric? I'm sorry, don't say it once again.
How many trips abroad did you take?
Oh.
And how did you manage to pay for all that travel?
Some of the payment was done after the fact. It was always risky investments. I always went there without knowing, most of the time, without knowing whether any of these magazines or newspapers would pay me. But I always tried to find a place where news was happening that nobody else knew about, like being on the phone with different scientists. and trying to be the only English speaker there, or certainly the only English speaking reporter there. And so it wasn't my great gifts of writing that got me the story, it's just I was the only English speaker there to be able to report on it. So just trying to be the right place at the right time, and then I got paid after the fact, and that usually more than paid for my bills for travel. But I do have this nonprofit organization that pays me a salary, and I have Christian friends. Actually, I had Christian friends. I'm in the middle of a big problem there. I'm trying to regroup, but it has been in the past that basically I was able to pay me a salary. That was just a normal little salary that kept me going. Yes? Yes, Jesse.
Hi, Fred.
Hey.
Mine is a two-part question, and it's concerning your advice for atheists in regards to when they have conversations with believers. You suggested that we point out their biblical inconsistencies, like how they were not acting like Jesus. Could you see how this would, A, sort of seem to us like a self-serving request, and B, how it would have
Why would it be a self-serving request to an atheist?
to Christians?
To Christians. So why this? So you're saying I'm being self-serving by suggesting this?
Could you see how we would see that?
Absolutely, I'm being self-serving. I'm serving the cause of what I believe in. So yeah, I'm doing that. I see that. You're right. But that's not good. I'm hoping you have a different motivation than I do. My motivation obviously has to do with Jesus and all that stuff you don't care about. But your motivation is still wanting to do the right thing, right? So I would hope we've got some synergy there. But the second part, I've had to break that up because I can't keep two thoughts in mind at the same time.
In our conversations, it's sort of getting us to promote the worldview in our conversations. But the B to that was, do you see how we would have a hard time basing an argument that we were making on the Bible when we don't like our opponents in conversation? Like, you know what I mean?
You don't like your opponents in conversation?
We don't like our opponents in conversation to base their arguments on the Bible, so do you see how we can have a hard time basing an argument that we were making against their actions on Jesus' behavior?
I can see that. If it doesn't work for you, don't do it. I just gave you an idea to try out. If you want to, if you listen to anything that will work for you, great. My time's up, it looks like, so thank you everybody for your kind attention. Appreciate it.